Ministers' questions. Politics Live.
It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster.
Essentially, my question to ministers is, well, what about these people who are in work and will potentially lose that payment and therefore no longer be able to maintain that employment?
Unhappiness amongst Labour MPs as the government publishes its welfare reform bill.
Are you going to get on?
Yeah.
You go to England?
Yeah, England.
The Prime Minister says the situation in the English Channel is deteriorating as the fine weather brings an upsurge in crossings. HS2 is delayed by a further 2 years after the government reveals the final price tag could be £100 billion. And why Scotland will send its rubbish to England after banning landfill. Joining us today, Labour MP Helena Dollimore, Shadow Foreign Minister and Conservative MP Wendy Morton, SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn and Fraser Nelson from The Times. This is Politics Live. And we will start with events in the Middle East as Israel and Iran continue to attack each other, and the world waits to see what Donald Trump, the American president, will do next. He has been posting on social media, as you might expect. He said in a message, a threat really, to the supreme leader of Iran, we know exactly where he is hiding. He's an easy target, but he is safe there. We're not going to take him out. Kill, at least not for now, but we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. And then he goes on to say to Iran in a very blunt message, unconditional surrender. Now, the response to that has come from the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, and he has said, we must give a strong response to the terrorist Zionist regime. We will show the Zionists no mercy. So, Helena, is it possible to gauge what Donald Trump is going to do next?
Well, what the UK is urging in this difficult situation is for all parties to step back and to de-escalate the situation. Escalating this situation is in nobody's interests. So we're focusing our energies as a government on talking to partners in the region, urging them to step back and de-escalate this situation.
It doesn't sound like Donald Trump is doing that, though, does it?
It's not for me to comment on the actions of the US president, but we are focused on using our energies to talk to partners in the Middle East, to be constructive and talk about why de-escalation is very important. It's not in anybody's interests. Look at the situation at the moment. Oil prices are going up. We need to see restraint and we need to see people stepping back.
Wendy, do you think there's influence we can have here?
Well, I think, Helena's right. We have to focus on de-escalation. And trying to get some stability in the region. That's the really, really concerning thing with all that's going on across the Middle East at the moment. I think it's also clear that Iran must never be allowed to obtain nuclear weapons. So I think it's a very, very difficult, very, very worrying situation.
And if America were to get involved, what would you think about that?
Well, I think let's just focus on using every effort possible to get that stability and to get the de-escalation. I've got no idea, I think, what Trump will do next, if he will do something next. So let's focus on where we can try and have some influence. But that's why I urge the government to keep using every strand that they can to maximise any influence that they have.
And I think what we shouldn't lose sight of as well, with all this discussion about Israel and Iran, is the situation in Gaza and the acute humanitarian situation happening there, the need to get towards that two-state peaceful solution, which this government is working towards, to get more aid desperately into Gaza, to get the hostages out and bring about a peaceful solution. And with all this talk about Iran and Israel, we mustn't lose sight of the suffering that's going on there.
But I think on the aid, it's absolutely crucial that we get it in and we keep asking those questions.
OK, Stephen?
Yeah, it's terrifying, isn't it? It's terrifying to consider the potential catastrophic impact upon civilians right across the Middle East and also domestically, because if there is a war in the Middle East, it is going to impact us massively. The Strait of Hormuz is 30–40% of the world's oil and gas flows go through there, so there is going to be a knock-on impact of us if the President seeks to do anything. But what I do think we need to do is reflect on the fact that the President has form for toying with people on Twitter, or X as it's now called. He did it with Gaza when he said he wanted to turn it into some sort of Miami-style condo, and he appears to be doing so again. So what I would like to see, and I think there's probably broad agreement around the table on this, is a focus on that de-escalation, because the West has a fairly checkered past when it comes to involvement in the Middle East, and let's not go there again.
Fraser?
I'm not sure I do agree. I mean, I think what's most terrifying of all is the idea of Iran having a nuclear weapon, which it can plausibly fire at Israel. Now, the problem with these strikes is they haven't yet taken out Iran's nuclear capabilities. They're 200 metres underground. There's only one bomb in the world that can get there, and that's the American bunker buster bomb, which the US is considering using. It would need to go from an American B-2 if it's used. But so I think you can want two things. You can either want de-escalation, or you can want Iran's nuclear bomb capability to be taken out. One of these two things. If you think the world would be a safer place without the Iranians having nuclear capacity, which I do, then you would seek that all this drama would at least end in the defanging of Israel. And that's something which I imagine lots of the Arab countries, Bahrain, certainly Saudi Arabia, would certainly thank Israel for, or probably in private.
Well, we can see that although the UK is not directly involved in this, of course, American planes do, of course, use bases here in the UK. There was pictures we can see where they were taken in Suffolk. Yesterday, they appear to show an aerial refuelling tanker accompanied by 4 jets. I think we were seeing those a little bit earlier. I mean, what do you think about that? The idea that actually, yes, Iran shouldn't have this capability, and this is a chance to make sure that doesn't happen.
Look, I don't think anyone wants to see Iran with a nuclear weapon. On that, we would.
So how do you stop them?
Agree.
That's the question before us now, right?
But of course, we haven't seen any evidence, Fraser, unless you've got a crystal ball that I'm not aware of Iran having nuclear capacity in the way that you're portraying. And we've had these conversations with the Middle East before in respect of other nations and their supposed presence of nuclear weapons on their territory, and look what that caused. So what we need to do is make sure that we have a holistic, full understanding of what's happening. I actually think...
they're not making a nuclear bomb then?
No, I didn't say that. Don't be... I did not say that. What I said was you've not got any evidence that tells us that they do have a nuclear bomb.
Right,
and that's
so you doubt that they're trying to make one?
If there is that evidence, then present it. Show it to me. Show me where I can see that.
Wouldn't it be a wee bit too late by the time they actually built one?
But we had these arguments before in relation to Iraq and weapons of mass destruction, did we not?
So in that case, you're quite chilled about it.
So I'm not chilled about it at all. I don't want to see conflict in the Middle East, and for certain, I don't want to see the loss of civilian life, which of course we've seen for very many months.
But when it comes to taking out nuclear bomb facilities, that's something which you think is preemptive because you don't quite believe that they're really going to make a bomb.
But of course, Fraser, Iran has been mooted to be making a nuclear bomb for many, many years now, decades.
And it's getting quite close. That's the whole point of this conflict.
So let's present that evidence and let's have a rounded argument in relation to that. But let's not rush into something when we can de-escalate and seek to make sure that the IEA is in there and the United States is able to get into a position where it can agree a position with Iran, which has been done in the past, by the way.
Europe, are not doing anything
Let
here.
Fraser just come back on that.
No, first off, let's not pretend that whether Britain urges anybody to escalate, it will make the blindest bit of difference. And I think here the question is, do you want to, given that we've gone so far down this road, given that even China is not coming down on either side, is this an opportunity to make sure that Iran does not present the nuclear threat to the rest of the region that it's very close to doing? Now, Stephen says, how do we know they're really close to it? It might all be a Saddam Hussein-style bluff. Well, if you look at the other...
No, I'm saying present the evidence. We don't need to warmonger. What we need is evidence to make informed decisions. And we don't have that. You're not presenting me anything that says that they have a nuclear capability.
We, as in this country, isn't required to do anything right now. This is the question of what we think America is going to do.
Yes.
No, but we've got allies. But right now, obviously this has been orchestrated not just between America and Israel, but I suspect by the Saudis too. I reckon that in Trump's trip to the Middle East, we all know that the Sunni world does not want a nuclear-armed Shia state. Nobody wants a multipolar nuclear standoff in the only part of the world that's likely to use these things. So I think de-escalation can be a little bit of a cliche if we think that we are close to being able to properly de-escalate by making sure Iran doesn't have a nuclear bomb. If that can be done with a minimal loss of life by military targets alone, then I think that's an opportunity worth looking at.
It doesn't look like we're looking at a minimal loss of life at the moment, either in Israel or indeed in Iran, does it? Because civilians are being caught up in this.
Let's move on to the government's welfare plans because they are being published today. This is the Welfare Reform Bill, which will reveal the details of the changing eligibility for personal independence payments. Several dozen MPs, if not more, are reportedly very unhappy about all of this, and some of them will be prepared to rebel. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Amelia Adler. She is claiming a PIP. She's been claiming that for several years, and she's now 21. This is what she told me earlier.
So I have autism, mental health illnesses, and also different physical health problems. And I do work part-time, and the PIP just allows me to work, to even get to work, for example, my car, and all the travel costs and food costs. And it just allows me to be independent. Without it, I wouldn't work, I wouldn't go out into the community, and I would literally be stuck at home, which is what got me really unwell in the first place. So it's like it allows me to be a member of society, and without it, I would have to stop my work.
Do you think that there's a lack of understanding from some politicians about particularly people who are neurodiverse or who have mental health issues, that they need this payment as well?
Definitely. I think because from the outside we look okay, you can't see that there's anything wrong with us. But behind the scene, there is so much that goes on and so many difficulties that, you know, people aren't aware of. And I'm afraid that we'll be left behind just because everything looks okay. And it
The politicians say that there's too many people claiming this benefit, and that actually once you start claiming it, it means that maybe you don't ever get into work. Now, that's not the case with you, but do you see that there's an issue there?
No, because what I get from PIP is nowhere near enough to be able to live off anyway. It just is a little bit that gives me the extra pounds to do the things that keep me well alongside work. I wouldn't be able to live comfortably or even live at all, really, just based off what I get from PIP. So I don't think it's accurate when they say that.
And can you just explain briefly what kind of things this money helps you with that help you get to work? Why do you need it?
For example, petrol, I can't take public transport, so I need to drive. And even the clothes that I wear, I'm very sensitive in terms of what I can wear, so certain clothes might be more expensive, and I obviously need clothes in order to go out. The food, I am offered food at my workplace, but I have a lot of difficulties in terms of like sensory things, so I need to have certain food, so I will need to buy that myself. So it's these little things that almost from the outside seem really like minor, but when you put them together, it's actually quite a sufficient like extra money that I would need to be spending on top of the average person.
Thank you so much, Amelia, for talking to us about your situation, and people watching, I think, can start to understand a little bit more about your life as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Amelia talking to me a little bit earlier. So, Helena, what do you make of this? I mean, PIP is obviously used by some people who are in work, some people who aren't. The government says it wants to take £5 billion out of that budget. Do you think it's the right thing to do?
Well, there's three basic principles behind our reforms to the welfare system, because at the moment, the welfare system we have is completely broken. It's a system that the Conservatives presided over for 14 years, and it's seen costs soar and too many people told that they can't work when they want to work. I represent a coastal community, Hastings and Rye, and for too long, people in my community have been told by the broken welfare system and signed off and told they can't work when they want to work. I have mums coming into my...
But PIP is claimed by people in work.
I have mums coming into my surgery furious because their teenagers have come out of education, gone to the job centre looking for that support to get into work and been told actually they can't work instead of given that support. So our reforms are about giving the support to people who can work to work. PIP is exactly a way of doing that, where you have extra costs.
She might end up losing it. She fears she's going to lose it.
I don't think this is the place to discuss Amelia's case. It's right that she gets proper advice on that. If she would like to get in touch with me after the show, I'd be very happy to put her in touch with someone who can give her that advice.
She is worried, and she told us she's worried.
But the IFS has said...
There are many others who are too.
Absolutely. People are understandably concerned, but the IFS has said that 9 in 10 people who currently get PIP will still get PIP after these reforms. By the end of this Parliament, 750,000 people will be getting PIP than at the moment. But it is right we reform the system to make sure that the support goes to people like Amelia, who need it the most, and is there to support people like Amelia. Because if we don't reform the system, the costs are soaring so much that the welfare system will collapse, and it will not be there to support those who need it the most, who are those who are simply unable to work, and they must always be protected in this system. And there's also reforms that are about removing the constant reassessment for people who can never work, giving people the right to try work, which is something I hear from so many of my constituents that they want
Fraser,
to, and they're worried about losing benefits.
You've done a lot of work on the welfare system. You did a documentary on it. What do you make of what you've heard?
I think there's a tragic missed opportunity here. The welfare system is certainly broken. I completely agree with Rachel there. The Conservatives left a terrible mess. And we left a trajectory where the number on sickness benefit was 3.5 million, rising to 4.1 million in just a 3 years' time. That's like the working age population of Birmingham about to be disappear from the workforce. But when you look at the new projections after the Labour reforms, they're exactly the same. So what we needed to do was to have some proper intervention so you can give people the support they need to go into work. Instead, the official forecasts say that this machine, which is just churning people out of the labour market, putting them on the fringes of society, will keep going. 2,000 people a day, every working day, are being put on sickness benefit. That isn't going to change under any of these reforms. But so instead, Labour is looking at saving money. Now, of course, you can save money by taking away people's benefits. But politically, this is the most dangerous thing to do, because you will get people coming on TV and everywhere else saying, look, I need this to get by, these cuts are going to really hurt me. This is the kind of I, Daniel Blake kind of territory that Ken Loach made a film about. It's the toughest thing to do politically, but it's just penny pinching. We don't really see any change in the trajectory, any change in people's lives. So this is, sadly, I mean, there's a case for tough love. But here, there's no love.
I don't accept that. The clue is in the name. We are the Labour Party. We are the party of work. We believe in the benefits of people going to work when they can, but protecting those who can't work.
This isn't about,
and
this isn't
these
about people
reforms...
who can't work. This is about disabled people. This is about disabled people, some of whom are already in work. And we've just heard an example of that. I myself, I claimed disability benefits. I was disabled for 18 years until I got a hip replacement a couple of years ago. I know the benefit of being on having access to either disability living allowance as it was then, or personal independence payment, or adult disability payments in Scotland as it now is, can make to someone's life, that can facilitate their ability to get to and from work, or to do the basic things. In some cases, like be able to wash themselves. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about disabled people. We're not talking about what Fraser believes to be the problem, which is people who are not in work. We're talking about disabled people. This is about
targeting...
And you are going to put 250,000 people into poverty, including 50,000 children. If you want to talk about the name of the Labour Party, that is not it.
This is about targeting the support of the welfare state at those who need it the most, those who can never work, and giving support to those who want to work. Amidst these reforms is £1 billion of support to get people into work. The analysis that you're talking about looks in isolation. It doesn't look at any of the positive measures we are taking to lift children and people out of poverty. Look at the reforms we've announced to the housing system, building more social homes. Look at the announcement last week to give free school meals to hundreds of thousands more children, thousands in my own constituency. Look at the fact that in the budget we gave the lowest paid... Let me speak. Don't talk over me, let me speak. In the budget, we gave 3 million of the lowest paid workers a raise in the national minimum wage. That's worth £1,400 a year. That helps lift people out of poverty. It makes work pay better. And that analysis that you've talked about doesn't include any of that, which is why the OFS is going back and doing it again to look at the positive measures. But we are a Labour government who has a track record of lifting people out of poverty. We intend to do that again as part of this government, and judge us on our record of doing that.
I'm judging you on your actions. You're way to put 50,000 children into poverty.
Wendy, your party wants to cut more from the welfare bill, don't you?
I think what we have to... We've talked a lot about welfare here. The paper's just come out today. As ever, the devil will be in the detail, and I think it's important we look at that.
But we know they want to take £5 billion out of it.
A lot about PIP. But I think that, we have to get back to something really fundamental here. There are people who want to work, who have disability. Of course, they need support. There are still issues with generational unemployment and people who do not want to go to work, who are not used to that whole that when you leave school education, the presumption is you go to work when you can. But unfortunately, when you do need to modernise welfare, but alongside that, you have to work with employers and with businesses. And at the moment, what we're seeing
your approach didn't work, did it? Fraser said you left the system in a mess. You had many years to sort this out.
If you're just going to squeeze employers and making it more difficult for them to
But what about, let's talk about the welfare system.
We're not talking about the actual policy the Labour Party are putting in place.
I'm broadening the issue, Stephen.
We're talking about something else.
I think we've heard enough of your views for now, Stephen. Let others have their view, which is that, of course, we started some reform on welfare. There is a big issue in this country with people just assuming that they can go and sign on.
So what do you do about that?
I think this comes back to, go back to education, go back to how we live as a society, and working, as I said, with employers, making sure that young people have the skills and that they're ready to go into employment. Because all too often I hear from employers that young people, some of them are not ready to go into employment.
But how are you going to do this? You want to cut even more than the Labour government is proposing.
We just cannot keep going like we are.
So what do you do?
Where you have to.
Someone will lose out under your plans.
But if you've got a strong labour market and a strong economy, which is the whole question mark about that, if you're working well with employers and not hammering them with things such as the job tax, creating more jobs so that people can go into them, making sure that we've got the right skills for those jobs.
There are so many vacancies in this country.
Yeah,
the problem is,
hang on a second.
People won't take them.
We've got lots of vacancies in this country. Now, the economic model run previously is we're using mass immigration to fill those vacancies, broadly speaking, and we're decommissioning economically weak people at a huge rate. Now, there are two ways of saving costs in welfare. One is by reducing the caseload. In other words, stopping this surge, this huge rise in the number of people who are dumped onto sickness benefit, never expected to return. The other way to do it is to take money off those already receiving benefits. Now, doing it that way is politically very difficult. It can be seen to be cruel, and it can leave Labour struggling to say where the overall social benefit is. But by reducing the caseload, you can do that quite easily. There are 9 reforms that you can make next week without any political problems.
Just give us one.
Give us one. To change the way that the assessments are done. Right now, it's a telephone interview, very easily gamed. People deserve an in-person interview.
So I think the government's bringing back on.
We are doing that. And what I would say is that the legacy of 14 years of the Conservatives is so many people in my community being written off, being told they can't work, instead of given that support. And frankly, in coastal communities like my own, instead of tackling the long-term structural issues that our communities face, like long NHS waiting lists, like housing issues, like the fact that 63% of young people in my constituency don't get a C in maths and English GCSE. And that is an education record that went backwards under the Conservatives. This government is investing in schools, it's cutting NHS waiting lists.
But you are cutting a benefit that is an in-work benefit for lots of people.
And actually take these long-term structural problems on to deal with those.
You can see why many people will watch this and think you're trying to save money, which a lot of people think might need to be done, but you're doing it by taking away or reducing a benefit that is an in-work benefit for many people.
By the end of this Parliament, 750,000 more people will get PIP than currently. We are reforming the system to make sure.
How many are you going to write
up?
We are reforming the system
to do
make
your
sure
backbenchers on this.
that people who can work get the support they need, but those who can never work are protected. And if we don't reform this system, at the current rate of increase, it will collapse, and it will not be there to support the people who need it the most, who can't work.
But you're not reforming the system, and that's why it's going up so much. It's crying out for reform. You've missed a trick. You're just penny pinching, and politically this will be devastating for Labour. Liz Kendall is a radically minded, very good politician. She can do so much better. It's baffling to me why Labour's had a year to think of this and is coming up with such a small reform. I know that Liz Kendall understands this perfectly. Now, whether it's that she was told by the Treasury it was too much, whether Keir Starmer thinks it's too, whether it's just got lost in the system, I don't know. But this is not reform. All this is doing is locking in a model which is inflicting huge economic and social damage on communities that deserve a lot better.
I think it's right that we set out the moral case for these reforms, because 1 in 8 young people at the moment are not in education, training or employment. That is a national scandal. People should be horrified by that. And this government's determined to tackle it.
Can I come back in?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if we want to talk about the moral case, let's go back to your own figures that say 50,000 children are going to be put into poverty in 250,000 households. That is simply not the values that people, or the change, actually, that people expected from the Labour Party. And when I listen to everyone else talking about the wider welfare system, we need to remember we're talking about people. People are under incredible strain. Some of them have gone through generations of strain, which has left them in this position. And we need to be able to get to the root cause of that. But the point of the discussion today is that the Labour Party is bringing forward a bill to take money away from disabled people.
So you would oppose those cuts?
Absolutely.
Stephen,
I
and in
will
Scotland,
oppose
what would you do something different?
Well, the adult disability payment, we already put more money into adult
So
disability.
where are your ideas for
Stephen,
reforming
as I've
it? Scotland's
said-
worse
Hang on.
affected than almost anywhere else. So where are your ideas for
Am
changing
I okay
it?
to answer the initial question?
Well, no, I
first? Is
thought
that okay?
interruption was your famous modus operandi.
Hang on, Stephen, just
You're
answer.
obviously learning from me then. In
Answer
regard.
that question.
And in terms of adult disability payments, the Scottish Parliament has already agreed to put in place more money. I think it's in excess of £100 million more towards that to support people. What we also have in Scotland, in stark contrast to what we have here in Westminster, is a Scottish,
Waiting lists not falling.
is a Scottish government which is seeking
NHS waiting lists not falling in
to
Scotland,
remove
but they
the
are in
two-child
England.
benefit cap. It's a Scottish Parliament which has put in place a Scottish child payment. And if the Labour Party were to replicate those policies, some 2 million people would be lifted out of poverty. That is how you deal with the systemic
Are
problems.
you
that we
worried
face and
about
support
too
the
many
people in
Scottish people
society.
not being? Are you worried about too many Scottish people being written off and not getting back into
But
work?
again, there's a big difference between taking money away from disabled people and trying to encourage people back into work. There's
you
two
worried about
different
workloadlessness?
conversations.
Worklessness. Easter House is one of the worst places in the whole of Europe in Glasgow for this. Doesn't that concern you?
Of course, I'm deeply
So
concerned
where
about
are your proposals to help the
you gonna
worklessness
really
in Easter
put-
House?
but
this is not what this bill seeks to do, Fraser.
where are
This
your
bill,
answers?
as you've just outlined, targets disabled people in the exact same way
I
that
agree
George
with you,
Osborne
but I'm
did.
wondering if the
Do you
SNP
agree
have
with
got
me?
any alternatives to help Scottish people who are suffering in Methil, there's so many parts in Scotland that are the welfare black spots of this country.
Yes, you
and I've never worked out why the SNP has had so few ideas about how to help them.
I'm sorry, but I don't think it's so few ideas to provide people with the financial support and the confidence to
It's
get
the
out of the
worklessness.
problems that they are facing.
It's the
You're making
worklessness
people
you need.
dependent.
You
not tackling
want
the
to talk about
underlying
these people
problems.
as if we shouldn't be supporting them. We should be supporting
Supporting them
to
back into work. That's what you're not
Of
doing.
course we should be doing that.
And where are your
And that is
ideas?
part of what we're seeking to do. But there's a big difference between that and cutting money for disabled people, which you have agreed with me is the purpose of
There
the
is
Wendy,
Labour bill.
Wendy.
There is nothing that Stephen has said there which is actually about helping people into work. It's all about handing more money out. And this is what we see time and time again from the SNP. And they need to understand that devolution actually has responsibility with it. And just handing out money is not the answer. Of course, people need support, but it's tackling the structural problems and challenges that we face in our communities.
I'm sorry, but I'm not going to take any lectures from a Conservative Party politician who introduced austerity, which crushed
Stephen, you
communities
can say all you
across
like, but you happen
and
to be
the
talking to a Conservative
societal
One at a time, one at a
fabric
time, one at a
right
time.
across the UK.
who left school at 18. I've worked every day of my life. We set up a business with £40 a week enterprise allowance. That business is still going. That was a government giving a little bit of support to enable somebody to start up in business. Isn't that the sort of thing that we should be doing? Not just giving out handouts with no support.
And I'm sure you were sitting there cheering on David Cameron and George Osborne as they ripped the social fabric out of society
You
through austerity.
completely get it
And the
wrong.
Labour Party are continuing with that
You completely
right
get it
now.
wrong, Stephen, because
Let
that's
Wendy
the
answer
line
that.
you like to take every single time. The SNP do everything good and everybody else is wrong. It doesn't work like that. Politics and this type of reform is far more complex than just the SNP handing out cheques.
It's this Labour government that has just given Scotland a record settlement in the spending review, almost £3 billion more than last time. And it's this Labour government that is taking measures to tackle child poverty, tackling the housing crisis. 1 in 27 children in Hastings and Rye are homeless. If we don't tackle that, we won't tackle poverty. Expanding free school meals, raising the national minimum wage for 3 million workers. While in Scotland, NHS waiting lists are not going down. They're going down in England.
Let Stephen answer that, then we'll move on.
Do you think that those your colleagues who vote against the government in this respect should have the whip removed like those who voted with myself in opposing the two-child cap?
OK, we're going to move on now to something which is very different. Look at this BBC News headline. Truckloads of Scotland's rubbish will be sent to England, according to experts. This is a story that up to 100 truckloads of Scotland's waste will be moved each day to England because of a landfill ban, which is coming in at the end of the year. And Scottish ministers say any export of waste should only be viewed as a short-term solution. BBC Scotland did a documentary about all of this. What's going on here, Stephen?
Sounds like we've finally found a union dividend, Fraser. No, I'm joking. Of course, this is an incredibly serious issue. The cabinet
about that.
Oh,
Let him
well,
finish.
it's
Sending us your
calm.
rubbish.
Well, it's as the cabinet secretary has outlined in Scotland. What is a temporary.
Let him just explain. Let him explain what's going on. What's going on here?
It's a temporary measure whilst we build up the capacity domestically in Scotland, particularly with relation to energy from waste sites, in order to ensure that we can combust our waste and turn it into electricity, like this is happening in my own constituency.
But isn't this a bit
of
nonsensical? You're going to
Aberdeen
have 100 trucks transporting waste.
That
doesn't sound good for the environment.
As the Cabinet Secretary has said, this is a temporary measure. But if we want to talk about exports, I mean, I'm quite happy to talk about what we export from Scotland to England.
But just tell us what the long-term... You said this is short-term. What's the long-term solution to this?
Well, the long-term solution was, as the Cabinet Secretary has set out, which is that we will have energy from waste plants in Scotland, which will be able to deal with the problems here. And also, when it comes to recycling, we'll be making sure that those rates
increase. How long is short-term?
Hang on, one at a time.
How long is short-term? What about the extra traffic on the roads? 100 lorries a day. Where is this rubbish going? We have landfill in my constituency in the West Midlands. I can tell you now, I would hate to think we were getting Scotland's trash in my patch. I just think this is a classic example.
You're happy to take our energy, 70.7 terawatt hours of energy, millions of homes being powered from Scotland, but you won't want to work with us in relation to that.
Wendy,
that's absurd.
No, it's not absurd at all. You're happy to take the cash from the government, but you're not happy to take responsibility. You've ended up in this situation because of a lack of planning and looking ahead. And what you are not saying is how long is this going to... How long is this going to... I'm asking you this about Scotland. How long... How long is short term? How long a community is going to have to face congestion on the roads? It would help if the A1 had been upgraded. You can say all you like, Stephen.
I'm
these are the real practical points
Let him answer.
facing communities.
So it's incineration is the answer. Incineration.
But you haven't got one.
But then you haven't got enough incinerators.
Well, we're obviously building up the capacity in that context, including in my own constituency of Aberdeen South. But I'd be intrigued to know what England does with its waste. Does anyone know? How much of England's waste is exported?
It depends on the local authority.
It depends on how much nationally is
Some
exported.
local authorities have higher recycling rates than others.
Where does England sit in the global table of exports?
We're not doing well, and we need to do better
so
at recycling.
England exports its waste.
And we also are reforming the recycling system in England, because at the moment, in some councils, you have 7 different bins for your waste, which is crazy.
England exports waste.
And a lot of people in my area really care about litter and waste. You know, Stephen's kind of shrugging his shoulders about it, but it's a really serious issue. Fly tipping on our streets is blighting our streets because of the lack of waste provision. It's a really serious issue. This government is actually changing the law so that if people are caught fly tipping, their vehicles can be crushed. It's a really serious issue in rural areas. It's, you know, huge fly tipping of extremely toxic waste that's happening, and too often a blind eye is being turned to it, so we're taking action to tackle that.
I think this is expert trolling from the SNP. This is, you couldn't think of anything which is, of course, more designed to get, we're sending our waste down to England, and, this is why Stephen thinks it's so funny, because there is an aspect of this politically. That this is a sort of, typical kind of SNP, let's have it, noise them up, And, when it comes down to it, of course, Stephen, you're right, people send their waste all around the world. I mean, the fact that we send out to the landfill in the Philippines doesn't mean we think any less of Filipino people, but the optics of this, put it this way, there'll be certain... Stephen won't be the only nationalist smiling at the kind of uproar this is creating.
Let's look at this BBC News headline. Bin collections will be every 3 weeks, Council says. This is something else that certainly gets people pretty irritated. Is there a wider problem here with... You were talking about the recycling, about having a certain number of bins. Councils can't cope with weekly bin collections, can they?
I think many councils can, and many councils have protected weekly bin collections. It's very concerning to hear that in Bristol, the Green Council is moving to monthly bin collections. I think people are finding that very concerning. I think it's right that councils protect that. There are some reforms coming in around EPR, which is about asking some of the companies that produce some of this waste to actually pay towards the cost of having better waste management systems overall. Because I think the problem we've got at the moment is that every council's doing its own thing. There are some industries that produce a lot of waste, and it's right that they pay towards the costs of the councils dealing with that. So those reforms are coming in.
You could make it weekly bin collections. This was actually about South Gloucestershire, that particular headline that we showed you there. But, people don't like it, do they? A lot of people. Why don't you tell them they've got to do weekly bin collections?
Councils. Well, many
Yeah.
councils do weekly bin collections.
But the ones that don't?
Well, that's a decision for the parties that run those councils to make.
Wendy?
Look, I think...
Is this a wider problem with recycling, do you think?
I think it's often confusing in some areas where that you have lots of different bins for different things. I completely get why we need to recycle, but the one thing that local residents judge a council by is its ability to empty the bin. It's the one thing that people say, we pay our council tax, we expect that. But, you know, we're talking about bin collections every 3 weeks. There are parts of Birmingham who, after 9 weeks, still haven't had their bins collected. You know, Birmingham bin strike is ongoing. And I think that is totally unacceptable. So, you know, regular bin collections are absolutely critical and need to be maintained.
Fraser, is there a wider problem with recycling, do you think?
Yeah, of course, there's a massive problem with incineration capacity in Scotland and in England. That's why we're having to resort to the landfill. I mean, and also, again, fundamentally, is a lack of investment in both England and in Scotland for the facilities to do this. And this is, of course, we're all forever changing the way that waste is done, the amount of recycling, etc. And I think the biggest problem in both sides of the border is that the kind of investment, when you go on the continent, you see far higher tech. When you go to Skip, you see machines sorting rubbish in the way we still employ humans to do in this country. So this is something we need to take a lot more seriously.
And Stephen, just to go back to the incinerators, when will they be ready to go? You said we're building some. That doesn't sound like a short-term...
All I can do is take the Cabinet Secretary at her word, and she was obviously very clear about the fact that she regards this as a short-term issue. But just for clarity, when it comes to the waste from England, I think there was a report just a couple of years ago of English waste being burned on the streets of Turkey, because that's where it ended up. So I think those who are quite happy to shout at the SNP should probably get their own house in order first.
Now, we're going to just have a little look into the chamber, because it is, of course, Prime Minister's questions, although today it is the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. She is taking the place of Keir Starmer because he is at the G7 summit in Canada, and Chris Philp is going to be taking that role for the opposition. They do a rotation. I think this is the first time that he will have done it, the Shadow Home Secretary, of course. Let's just move on and look at something that happened yesterday in the House of Commons, where MPs voted to decriminalise abortion for women in England and Wales. It will stop women in England and Wales being prosecuted for ending their pregnancy. The landslide vote to decriminalise the procedure is the biggest change to abortion laws in England and Wales for nearly 60 years. Women who terminate their pregnancy outside the rules, for example, after 24 weeks, will no longer be at risk of being investigated by police. Helen, how did you vote in this?
I voted for the amendment to decriminalise abortion.
And why do you think it was necessary?
I personally feel that this is a conscience vote, so everybody voted based on their own personal beliefs. But I personally feel it's wrong to criminalise women that are going through extremely distressing situations. We are, until we voted for this last night, we were one of the few countries in the world that actually criminalised the women. Even Texas, which has got much more extreme restrictions on abortion than us, doesn't choose to criminalise the women. And what we've seen in recent years is a really disturbing number of cases of women being taken from their hospital beds, having suffered a very traumatic experience, taken to a prison cell, and that is not right. It's right that these women are given support, they are treated compassionately, and that's why I voted for the amendment put forward by Tonya from the Labour benches last night to decriminalise abortion.
Wendy?
As Helen said, it was a free vote. I chose to vote against it. I am not anti-abortion, I am pro-choice. But what I really, really objected to yesterday was the way in which that amendment was Christmas treed into that piece of legislation.
What you mean by that is it was added on to...
It was added into a bit. It was. We can do that. It was a big bill, but we've seen this time and time again. And I think that something like this should have had more time for debate as a standalone piece of legislation. I know it's difficult because it's a free vote. They tend to be on Fridays, so the PMB route. But I just do not feel that it was the right way of doing it. I also really worry now about what this means. I know that there are some women who've had real issues over this, but the fact that somebody can now get basically pills through the post almost up until the point of birth, that's the bit I feel really, really uncomfortable about.
They can't get pills through the post up to birth.
That's not legal. But I just really worry about where this is taking us, and I think You know, the abortion law has been there since 1967, for 50 years. I know there's lots of arguments that say perhaps it is time to look at it, and I don't disagree with that. But what I fundamentally disagreed with yesterday is the way in which this conscience issue was shoehorned into.
And Fraser, on the actual proposal, you came in there about the.
No, it was a free vote, although it did feel a bit.
No.
Like.
What do you feel about this?
I think this is a really interesting example of a debate getting far, far away from reality. If you go to social media today, most people get the news from social media than they do from newspapers. It's as if we've now decriminalised abortion until birth. We haven't. The 24-week limit stays the same. Anybody who provides an abortion after that will be faced with criminal charges. The only thing that's changed is in a handful of instances where this will happen, the woman herself will not be prosecuted. And I think it's so important to be very careful, to use very careful language here, because right now, I suspect if you did an opinion poll, most people in the country would think that we've pretty much decriminalised abortion to birth, no matter what. Those limits stay. As you're saying, Richard, to actually give an abortion pill will remain a criminal offence. You'd be really hard pushed to find anybody who's going to do that. And so the instances we're talking about are so fleetingly rare. And the debate, however, in these sort of culture wars times of ours, is taking on a life of its own. And I do think that those who advocate and support it could have made a lot better case in making that clear. There's a little bit of a, let's go the other way to Donald Trump, look at America, they're doing X, so let's do Y. We have not changed the rule on 24-week abortion in this country. It is not, if you want to get one, there is no legal way for you to do so. All we're saying is that in a handful of very rare cases where somebody does manage to break the law and get it, that woman herself will not be prosecuted. So I think it's, the battle for nuance nowadays, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to try to get this across when everybody judges the news via one sentence social media. But it's worth fighting for the nuance in this instance. And I speak as somebody who, by the way, is pro-life rather than pro-choice.
The change in Scotland, do you think there will be a change in Scotland? Because at the moment, my understanding is that Northern Ireland has made this change, but Scotland hasn't?
Yeah, it's my understanding that these things are always under review. I didn't partake in the vote, obviously, because I don't believe it's my duty as a Scottish Member of Parliament to tell people in England and Wales what they can and can't do. But I think the assessment from Fraser there was pretty measured and on the point and summarised the situation pretty well.
I think there's an important aspect as well to this, which is that there is actually no way to tell if somebody has suffered a miscarriage or if somebody has, for whatever reason, ended up going down a different route. And it's extremely traumatic. There have been cases of women who have suffered miscarriages later on in their pregnancy who have been accused of this wrongly, and they've had to go through an extremely distressing experience at what is an extremely difficult time for them, and that has to end.
Are you worried that people might have got the wrong impression of what this change has done, as Fraser was saying?
I think it's very important that people don't spread misinformation about it and people look at the facts, which is that, as Fraser has said, there has been no change to the time limit for abortions. There has been no change to the fact that a medical professional who gives an abortion after the time limit would be prosecuted, and that is not legal in this country. That is illegal still. This is just about saying that in those small cases where, for whatever reason that happens, the women are not the people who are prosecuted.
That's why I think it shouldn't have been brought forward in the middle of that bill. It should have had its own separate piece of legislation. Then it would have had more chance to have a proper debate and more scrutiny. Because what did we get yesterday? An hour and three-quarters,
sort of
maybe 2 hours.
Didn't it? And I reckon if you were to do an opinion poll in 1 week or 2 weeks' time, the country will have a fundamentally wrong idea of a law.
There's also another further problem, which is that if somebody, for example, voted in that amendment against it, and then they're whipped to vote at third reading on the bill, where does that leave them? Because you've got a conscience issue in the middle of a piece of legislation.
Let's look ahead to Prime Minister's questions. And as I said a bit earlier, Chris Philp is doing this, I think, for the first time on behalf of Kemi Badenoch, because the Prime Minister is not here. He is the Shadow Home Secretary. So now, Fraser, if you were going to be Chris Philp for the day, what would you go on in terms of topic?
Oh, welfare. I think the government is vulnerable here. I think the Conservatives did have a reform which Labour abandoned. So you could say, look, under our reforms, you would have been sending far fewer people onto the scrap heap than we did. I mean, there aren't many problems the Conservatives can point to right now that they weren't ultimately responsible for. This is the problem of opposition. You can name the top 20 things going wrong in Britain and you'll find a Conservative signature behind that policy. So in the one area where Labour actually has press the rewind button on the reform, I'd go for that. But I don't think almost anybody in the House of Commons is talking seriously about welfare right now.
I mean, Wendy, that is the issue for your party, isn't there? That the changes and the attacks that you might, land on the government, they will turn around and say, well, you didn't do anything about it. And welfare is a case in point.
That's always the case, isn't it, for a certain time when you move into opposition. But equally, for every week, every month that goes by, the Labour government has nearly been in government for a year now. So I can say that say, for example, the police and crime bill that is going through at the minute, a lot of that was in the criminal justice bill a year ago, which we were working on, fell because of the election. So it's that is the reality, though, you're right, of moving from government into opposition. But what are people out there thinking? That's the most important
I think
barometer.
the challenge is for the Conservative Party right now that people haven't heard them show any contrition and offer an apology for what happened under the last 14 years.
It's a bit rich. Labour saying that when you've turned on things like winter fuel,
particularly under the Liz Truss mini-budget, which, of course, Wendy was the chief whip for, people haven't forgotten what happened then and how badly things went for the Conservatives. And I think it is
it's not
vital.
Going great for Rachel Reeves, is it?
It's too easy to hit you with that,
I know.
It's too easy.
The thing about Liz is, though, she knew that we needed to change and we needed to drive some economic growth. I will leave it there as far as Liz is
But
concerned.
it was a disaster. You accept that. The mini-budget was a disaster.
I am not being drawn anymore. We are now considering what your government is doing. You've almost had a year.
But you won't accept the mini-budget was a disaster.
We are already seeing you turn.
You resigned, Wendy.
We are already... Not on the mini-budget, I didn't. We are already seeing...
A few weeks later, it was all falling apart.
We are already seeing...
Mortgages went up.
We are already
People's
seeing
rents went up.
That wasn't
And inflation... One at a time. Go on, Fraser. Yeah. Go on, do the defence.
Right, it's quite simple. And right now there is an LDI crisis. This is a sort of subprime thing. Everybody missed it, and everybody blamed Liz Truss because they'd missed it. £1 trillion was facing these things. They were always primed to blow up, and it suits everybody. People on Rishi Sunak's side who hated Liz Truss, Labour, everybody else to make out that Liz Truss ramped up mortgages. Mortgages went up worldwide. Britain had the LDI crisis. I'd say she's responsible for a quarter of it, 3/4. This matters because failure to learn from these mistakes means we're vulnerable to repeat them. If our watchdogs all failed, the Financial Times, nobody missed this, everybody missed this LDI build-up. If we missed that, what are we missing now?
I think the failure here is to learn from the disaster of the mini-budget, the impact that had on my constituents' lives. Their mortgages went up, their rents went up,
Everybody's
cost of living got even worse. This Labour government is starting to fix that damage. Waiting lists are going down. We're investing in our public services that were starved for 14 years.
Hang on, Stephen.
Can I answer the question you asked Fraser about what you would ask Angela
Go on then,
Rayner?
what would you do?
I would ask Angela Rayner the exact same question I asked Helena earlier that she didn't get to answer, which was if Labour MPs oppose the government's changes to cuts to disability benefits, will they have the whip removed?
That's a question for the chief whip.
You must be...
Wendy knows that as a former chief whip under Liz Truss
it's a question
herself.
I would ask Angela if I was at the dispatch box.
The legislation has just been published today. It's right that MPs take the time to look at that
A lot of your colleagues are very
legislation
concerned about
and
it,
look at
aren't they?
in detail.
Have you been talking to them about the issue behind this?
Many of my colleagues believe that the system is fundamentally
We're going over
broken
now
and
to
it needs reform.
Prime Minister's questions.
Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been asked to reply. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has been attending the G7 summit in Canada. In an era of global instability, we are working with our partners to urge de-escalation in the Middle East, put pressure on Russia to agree to a ceasefire and deliver security renewal for the British people. Mr. Speaker, the Air India plane crash last week was devastating. Our thoughts and condolences are with everyone affected by this awful incident, and we're working closely with the Indian authorities to support those in need. And Mr. Speaker, 9 years ago we lost our beloved friend and colleague Jo Cox, who is a beacon of positivity and courage, and her legacy lives on. And I must also take this opportunity to also remember Sir David Amos, much missed by the whole of the House. Mr. Speaker, this Sunday marks Windrush Day. We celebrate the extraordinary contribution the Windrush generation and their descendants to our country. And Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the strong consensus across this House on the importance of de-escalation in the deeply worrying conflict between Israel and Iran, does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that the actions of this House must match its words? And will she therefore commit that before any further military support is given to the Israeli government, whether that's the potential deployment of the RAF jets or deployment of armed forces, that her government will first give MPs in this House a free vote?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the situation in the Middle East is fast-moving and deeply concerning. There is a clear potential for significant and rapid worsening of the situation. And every step that we take, we will always be guided by what the safety of British nationals and the UK national interest. That's why we've deployed jets to the region so that contingency support is in place for our armed forces personnel, and it's why we're asking British nationals to register their presence, and we'll keep all advice under review.
Olivia Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Too many of my constituents are stuck in unsuitable housing. And after 14 years of inaction from the party opposite, local families are being split up because there are not enough affordable homes. Can I welcome this government's plans to turbocharge the delivery of social and affordable housing, including through the new National Housing Bank, and ask my right honourable friend to confirm that this government will finally give my constituents the security that they deserve?
Deputy Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, she's absolutely right to talk about the 14 years of failure by the Conservatives. Labour's turning the tide on the housing crisis, and I'm proud to announce today our commitment to establish a new publicly owned National Housing Bank backed by £16 billion of new finance. This includes £2.5 billion, Mr Speaker, in low-interest loans for social housing to help achieve the biggest uplift to social and affordable housing in a generation.
Shadow Home Secretary Chris Phil.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I associate myself with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about the tragic air crash in India and, of course, what she said about our dear colleagues Joe Cox and Sir David Amess. I also join her in calling for de-escalation between Israel and Iran, while noting everything possible must be done to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon. Yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition and I met with survivors and family members of the rape gang scandal. Fiona, Teresa, Lucia and Marlon. They told us how authorities deliberately covered up the systematic rape of young girls and some boys by gangs of predominantly Pakistani heritage men. They covered it up because they cared more about so-called community relations than about protecting vulnerable girls. That is disgusting. The survivors told us they will only have confidence in an inquiry if it is independently led, has full statutory powers, covers all 50 towns affected, including Bradford, if those who covered this up are prosecuted, if foreign perpetrators are all deported, if survivors are closely involved, and if it is set up before the summer recess. Can the Deputy Prime Minister give the survivors and their families those assurances?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, first of all, can I thank him for his tone and putting the survivors and victims at the heart of his question here today. I think it's absolutely right that we all look at what's happened over the last couple of decades, the countless reports that we've had, and we look to implement that. He's absolutely right to also talk about the confidence people must have in that independent inquiry. And the member, my friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, spoke about that earlier this week in regards to Baroness Casey's report. So we will take that forward at speed, Mr Speaker. It will be independent, it will have statutory powers, and we will implement the J report, which was he will have known about as the Shadow Minister in the Minister in charge at the time, and we'll get on with taking the action. I hope members of his party will take his tone in making sure the whole House put the victims first and we all work together to get to the bottom of it.
Well, I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her answer. It is vital that scandals like this are never again covered up because of the racial background of perpetrators. And Baroness Casey's report said people who downplay the ethnic dimension are letting victims down, to use her words. So I do have to raise the language the Prime Minister used in January when he, I'm afraid to say, smeared campaigners as jumping on, quotes, a far-right bandwagon simply for calling for the very inquiry he has now been forced to set up. Standing up for rape victims is not far right. So will the Deputy Prime Minister apologise for what the Prime Minister said?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I say, Mr Speaker, that the Prime Minister did not just raise issues but acted on them. He brought the first prosecutions against grooming gangs, called for action to address ethnicity issues in 2012. And the honourable member will know that the data that the previous government collected was inaccurate and not complete. And Casey recognised this, and it's one of the recommendations that we will be taking forward. The Prime Minister made those comments specifically about Tory ministers who sat for years in the government and did absolutely nothing about this scandal.
Smearing campaigners standing up for rape victims as far right is completely unacceptable, and the Prime Minister should never have said that. And I commend his predecessor, the member for Richmond, for the grooming gangs task force he set up, which led to 550 arrests in its first year. Now, Baroness Casey's report also said that a significant number of rape gang perpetrators were non-UK nationals or were asylum seekers, many of whom entered the country illegally. And we know, of course, that most illegal immigrants crossing the Channel are young men, contrary to what the Chief Secretary said last week. So does the Deputy Prime Minister now accept that the small boats crisis is a crisis of public safety as well as a border crisis?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, this is a very serious issue and more needs to be done. And let me update the House. Working with our allies, we've carried out a series of major arrests to tackle smuggling gangs behind this vile trade. In the past month, a ringleader that smuggled almost 4,000 migrants has been jailed for 25 years. We could go further thanks to the law enforcement agreements we struck with Germany, Italy, Serbia and the Balkan states. In stark contrast to the honourable gentleman, he was the man at the heart of the Home Office when immigration soared. We lost control of our borders and spent £700 million of taxpayers' money on persuading just 4 volunteers to be removed from Rwanda. I take no lectures.
If she wants to find out who's lost control of our borders, I suggest she looks to her immediate right. Because ever since the Home Secretary scrapped the Rwanda deterrent before it even started, illegal immigration across the Channel has gone up by over 30%. And so far this year, 2025 has been the worst year in history for illegal immigrants crossing the Channel. That is on her watch. That is down to her government. The Prime Minister is now planning crisis talks with President Macron, finally admitting, in his own words, that the situation is deteriorating. The government's laughable plan to smash the gangs lies in tatters. So will she now at last accept we need a removals deterrent so every single illegal immigrant arriving on these shores is immediately removed? Will she commit to that, yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, if they want to argue that 40,000 arrivals since July 24 are down to the scrapping of the Rwanda scheme, they need to explain why there were more than 43,000 arrivals in the same period starting in July 22 when the Rwanda agreement was in place. It's absolute rubbish, Mr Speaker. They lost control of our borders. We're getting control of our borders. He needs to apologise.
I don't see how she has the brass neck to claim she's got it under control. When the numbers crossing the Channel this year are the highest in history. She asked about the Rwanda deterrent. I'll repeat, she obviously wasn't listening to what I said earlier. The Rwanda scheme never started. And indeed, illegal immigrants in Calais said they were...
Order! Order! Just do it. I want to hear the question, and I'm sure our constituents want to hear the question and the answer. Crystal.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Rwanda scheme never started. Illegal immigrants in Calais were saying before the election how much they wanted the Prime Minister to get elected because he would help them get here. When Australia started a similar scheme about 10 years ago, it worked within a few months. Now, Mr Speaker, as a consequence of the government losing control, they are now accommodating growing numbers of illegal immigrants, many of whom cross the Channel, in asylum, hotels and flats. The Home Office's suppliers are now actively offering above-market deals to landlords to get hold of their properties to be used for illegal immigrants. In the meantime, hard-pressed young people here are unable to rent or buy. So why is this government prioritising housing for illegal immigrants above housing for our young people?
So again, Mr Speaker, I gently say to the right honourable member opposite that under their watch, immigration increased fourfold until it reached almost 1 million in a single year. They also created the backlog, 400 hotels, which we've reduced to just over 200 hotels in the first 12 months of us being in government, Mr Speaker. £1 million a day spiffed up the wall because they were so incompetent. We're building the homes that they failed to deliver over 14 years of consecutive failure by their government. They should apologise while we get on with the job of rebuilding Britain.
Goodness me, she's got a cheek. Housing starts in Q4 last year went down. Her mission to rebuild Britain is not going very well. She talks about asylum hotels. She obviously hasn't looked at the most recent numbers. The number of people in asylum hotels was higher in March this year than it was at the time of the last election. And she gave no answer about the priority being given to illegal immigrants over people living here already. Now, Mr Speaker, a Zimbabwean paedophile due for deportation was recently allowed to stay in the UK because a court found he might face, quote, some hostility back in Zimbabwe, apparently breaching his Article 3 rights. What about the rights of children here to be protected from this dangerous paedophile? Who's looking out for their rights? Not the government. There are thousands of cases like this involving foreign criminals. So there is a solution. We need to scrap the Human Rights Act for immigration matters so this sovereign parliament decides on the law our courts apply. But her party voted against that. So I have a simple question. Why did the government side with foreign criminals and not the British public?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, again, Mr Speaker, they had 14 years of failure on these issues. We've also included 4,500 foreign national offenders that have been deported since we came into office, Mr Speaker, more than they did in the same period. I take no lectures from the Johnny-come-lately who couldn't do anything when he was in office.
And Elise Midgley.
Mr Speaker, last Saturday marked 8 years since Grenfell. 8 years fighting for justice. The Hillsborough families, including Margaret Aspinall from Huyton, have campaigned for 36 years for the Hillsborough law. Decades. So can the Deputy Prime Minister tell me today, will this Labour government bring forward the Hillsborough law without delay? Will it honour the promises made to victims of state cover-ups? And will it finally deliver justice for the 97?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her question and for the work with campaigners like Margaret in their fight for justice and for mentioning Grenfell, which of course with the 8th anniversary was not so long ago. We remain fully committed to bringing in a Hillsborough law. The state has failed victims and their families too many times in the past, and that is precisely why our focus is now on getting the legislation right. I can assure her that measures will be brought forward as soon as we're confident that they will deliver, Mr Speaker, the justice victims deserve, and we want to do this at pace.
Daisy Cooper, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On behalf of my party, may I associate myself with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about the Air India crash. And in a week when we remember the murder of Joe Cox and David Amos, our party's thoughts are with their friends and families and all those in this House who lost their beloved friends. We also remember those who died in Grenfell tragedy. Mr Speaker, in 2003, we Liberal Democrats were incredibly proud to lead the campaign against the Iraq War, a war in which the UK blindly followed the US in a move which was not backed by the United Nations. In light of reports that President Trump is seriously considering joining the war between Israel and Iran, launching a US strike against Iran's nuclear facilities, can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm that if President Trump does do this, that today's Labour government will not blindly follow the US into war again?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, the one thing I will say is we agree with President Trump that Iran must never have nuclear weapons. But we've been consistent in urging Iran to engage in the diplomatic process and work with the United States, and we continue to support that diplomatic approach.
Mr Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to the Deputy Prime Minister and we support those efforts. Today, the Government is set to unveil its plans to cut personal independence payments and carers allowance, a prospect which one of my constituents described as terrifying. Liberal Democrat analysis of the Government's own data suggests that 1.3 million disabled people are at risk of losing some support. So can the Deputy Prime Minister honestly say, hand on heart, that this is the change that 1 million disabled people and their carers were promised?
Well, Mr Speaker, Labour is the party of work and also the party of fairness and social justice. We've announced the plan to get Britain working again, and we're clear on the principles, Mr Speaker, and I want to be clear on that. Those who want to work should be able to work, and those who can never work should be protected. The current system we've inherited doesn't support those that need that support, and also doesn't allow and enable those to get opportunities for employment. I have personal experience of it. I know what the Honourable Lady is saying. I know how some people are fearful of the changes, but this Labour government put its values into place and will ensure that people are supported into it where they can, and where they can't, they are supported. We are the party of the welfare state, Mr Speaker. We set it up back after the Second World War, and we believe it should be there for people who need it, but we should also help people into work.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I welcome the... Yeah? Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, there's too many deputies in the place today. I apologise. Mr Speaker, I welcome the Government's announcement on grooming gangs. I'm sorry for stumbling. I've been floored by the point scoring that's going on around them. On all sides. I wonder if, if the Deputy Prime Minister is aware that the victims and survivors of grooming gangs are being denied compensation by the Criminal Injuries Agency on bizarre technicalities. They also deny all children of online abuse compensation. For me, this is a grave injustice, and they think they're better than the judge and jury. So I wonder what the Deputy Prime Minister plans to do, because personally, I think they should be abolished.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is a long-standing advocate for child protection, and I pay tribute to her campaigning on these issues. We share her determination to do what is right for the victims and the survivors, and we recognise that no sum of money can ever fully compensate for the horrors that they've experienced. And we are committed to funding efforts to tackle child sexual abuse in the future and support survivors to rebuilding their lives. And that's why we'll make it easier for victims to make personal injury claims through the civil courts by removing the 3-year time limit. And we're redoubling funding for therapeutic support services.
Carla Daniel.
Mr Speaker, this week is Refugee Week, an opportunity for this House to show solidarity with those fleeing war, persecution and oppression. Compassion and welcome are core British values, but for decades the Home Office has been undermining those values, as my new report, No Way Home, shows, by treating migration as a crime rather than making it work for our communities and for newcomers. So will the Deputy Prime Minister read the report and consider its recommendation to remove migration from the responsibilities of the failing Home Office?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'll commit to reading the Honourable Lady's report, because I think it's important we take all information on these issues. We inherited an asylum system under exceptional strain, which costs up to £9 million per day, and will end the use of hotels through suitable self-sufficient accommodation for asylum seekers, minimising the impact on local communities, and will protect and support asylum seekers when demonstrating value for the taxpayers.
Jodie Gosling.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On the 1st of July, Warwickshire County Council will permanently remove one of Nuneaton's 2 fire engines. Their decision is based on dubious data that does not accurately represent the current risk to residents. without accounting for local factors such as high deprivation. The cuts will put Nuneaton's lives in danger. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please look into this matter to confirm there has been sufficient scrutiny and a thorough risk analysis to ensure safety for the good residents of Nuneaton?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue. I know that the Fire Minister would be happy to discuss this further, and I'm committed to ensuring fire and rescue services across the country have the resources that they need to keep communities safe. The deployment of fire engines, though, is decided locally. So this really is a question for Warwickshire County Council, now led by Reform. So the member for Clacton should have a word with his county councillors in Nuneaton and get them to explain why Reform are cutting fire services.
People short.
Mr Speaker, I remember when the Deputy Prime Minister was a fierce critic of austerity and a proud champion for the disabled. But today, her government is introducing its £5 billion disability cuts bill, which will push another 250,000 people into poverty. Does she agree that everyone has the right to oppose such devastating cuts? So is it the Prime Minister's intention to remove the whip from any Labour MP who does the right thing and votes against these disability cuts?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I gently say to the honourable member that we've given, he talked about austerity, we've given the biggest amount of increase to Scotland. And I've covered this point in an earlier question, Mr Speaker. We're absolutely committed to ending child poverty. We've already introduced free school meals. We're already supporting families. We've given a living wage rise to over millions of workers that need it. We're getting on the job, Mr Speaker, of rebuilding Britain. He's had decades of failure under Scotland. They deserve better.
Jonathan Davis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Derbyshire's Derwent Valley is the home of the Industrial Revolution, and it is also now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That community showed a Victorian sense of purpose which delivered improvements to people's everyday lives. So can my right honourable friend set out how the government's £39 billion investment in housing will instil that same drive while maintaining the unique character of the East Midlands' only UNESCO World Heritage Site?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. I know he's a champion for regeneration across his constituency, and he's working hard to get homes built in his patch for his constituents. Our plan for change will deliver the biggest boost in investment in social and affordable housing in a generation. And for the first time in recent memory, Mr Speaker, we will give providers in his constituency a decade of certainty over the capital funding to build ambitious housing projects that honour Derbyshire's history.
King Timothy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Home Secretary says we should judge her success in smashing the gangs by whether the number of channel crossings falls. But under this government, the numbers are up by more than 30%. Yep. So by which date should we judge the Home Secretary? And if she fails, will she be fired?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, they continually vote against the measures that we're taking to smash the gangs. We're getting on with the job, Mr Speaker, working internationally to disrupt the abhorrent work of these smugglers and gangs, while he harps on from the sideline. He should apologise for their record in government, which was abysmal.
Mr Speaker, since becoming an MP, I've received thousands of pieces of casework from constituents who are stuck on social housing waiting lists. I've recently had an email from a woman with severe mobility issues, effectively trapped in her front room while she waits and waits for suitable social housing. Even when a home becomes available, she'll be forced to compete with other residents because there simply aren't enough affordable options. What will this new funding, the recent funding announced by the government, mean for my constituent and others like her who have already waited too long for a decent home?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, Mr Speaker, for highlighting the case, because it's not an isolated case. We inherited a really dire situation, and there's far too many people that don't have a safe and secure home that meets their needs. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor's announced a record funding, almost double the level provided by the previous government, who ended up handing back the cash for social and affordable homes, and Labour's plan for change, renewing our country and investing in Britain's future.
Other House, Sir Edward Lee.
When the government, quite rightly, gives full and unequivocal support to Israel in its bid to end the scourge of Iran's nuclear weapons programme forever, will the government also work with our allies to try and convince the Israeli government that it's not in the long-term security interests of Israel to carry on with this policy of illegal settlements in the West Bank, which is simply leading to radicalisation and desperation throughout the region. Have not the overwhelming majority of Palestinian people have the right to yearn for peace and security in their own homeland, as the Jews yearn for their homeland for 2,000 years?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I thank the Father of the House for his important question. Settler violence and expansion in the West Bank is appalling and completely unacceptable. Alongside our allies, we have sanctioned individuals responsible for inciting this extremist action, but a two-state solution is the only way to bring peace that the Israelis and the Palestinians deserve, and this is only achievable if the hostages are released, aid surged into Gaza and the ceasefire is restored, and we'll do everything we can to make that happen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In Scotland, over 10,000 children are stuck in temporary accommodation, including many in my constituency of Stirling and Strathallan. Too many families facing soaring rents, long waiting lists and dwindling options. It's just one of so many policy failings that we're all losing count and losing patience as public confidence in the SNP ability to govern collapses. What advice would she have for the Scottish SNP government as they continue to preside over a chronic failure to invest in the social and affordable housing Scotland so desperately needs?
Well, my honourable friend is right, Mr Speaker. Homeless levels are far too high, which has a devastating impact on those affected. Under the SNP, 10,000 children in Scotland shamefully have no fixed home to call their own, a record high. Our decisions have given Scotland a record settlement and the largest since devolution. We saw in Hamilton, Mr Speaker, how Scots are fed up with the SNP's excuses. They've been in power for nearly 2 decades and have nowhere left to hide from their failure.
Anne Davies.
Diolch, Mr Llefarydd. Welsh farmers are taking hit after hit, from Tory trade deals to Labour taxes. And now, on top of that, blue tongue restrictions affecting Wales and England will hamper cross-border trade. Over 550 farms on the border and key livestock markets rely on summer trading. Once in a year, opportunities like the Royal Welsh Show are crucial, and the disruption will be devastating. So will the Deputy Prime Minister commit to working with Welsh Government on a scheme to compensate for the losses?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I gently say to the honourable member, you don't deliver for Wales by voting against an extra £1.6 billion for public services like I did at the Senate. We will be making sure that we support Wales and support Welsh farmers, and we'll continue to do that as a UK government.
Andrew Pex.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the spending review last week, the government backed Peterborough with support for our new pool and sports quarter in the city. This commitment has the power to turn years of campaigning into a reality. But that's not all. The government has also recently approved the business case for our new station and given us new police. So can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister, does she agree that this is just the start and that places like Peterborough that were forgotten for too long by the party opposite are now top of this Labour government's agenda?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his comments, and flagged by the two ladies that have made sure that those things happen. The Chancellor's guaranteed funding to accelerate projects like Peterborough's new sports quarter, including, Mr Speaker, a new Olympic-sized swimming pool. And I can also confirm today that, subject to the business case approval, we will provide nearly £48 million of funding for a new city centre quarter and a refurbished Eastern Station building.
Paul Holmes.
Recently, a small family business in my constituency was burgled by a prolific offender who was serving an 8-month suspended sentence. The man was caught, arrested, charged and appeared at court, where he was given another 8-month suspended sentence and released. The business was offered £200 in compensation. Does the Deputy Prime Minister think that's justice served, or is this government now soft on crime and soft on the causes of crime?
Well, first of all, Mr Speaker, I'm really sorry to hear about that. Hard-working business people that spend a lot of their time building up a business should expect the full force of the law to protect their property and protect their interests. And can I also, while I've got the opportunity, congratulate the honourable member for running Hamble Valley's very first pub competition this year. I hope I'm going to get an invite. But But he's absolutely right, Mr Speaker, to say that we've got to have increased police numbers and making sure they're responsive to people's concerns. We're doing that. His government let them down.
Bill Powell.
Mr Speaker, Saturday marked 8 years since 72 people lost their lives in the Grenfell Tower fire. 8 years without justice, but finally the prospect of some systemic change following the public inquiry. So I welcome the government's commitment to barring all the cited companies from accessing public contracts and its full support to the police investigation to deliver real accountability. Can the Deputy Prime Minister also reassure our community that alongside the Hillsborough law, the government will consider some independent oversight so that victims from the Post Office to Hillsborough to Grenfell know inquiry recommendations will actually lead to real change?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. The Grenfell fire was a national tragedy and we must never forget the 72 lives that were lost, and it was an honour to pay my respects at the 8th anniversary at the weekend. We do remain fully committed to introducing the Hillsborough law, including a legal duty of candour for public services and criminal sanctions for those who refuse to comply. I know my honourable friend speaks with passion and authority on this. As I speak to the Grenfell community, I know this is something that they really want to see happen as quickly as possible, and we're exploring reforms to inquiries to get to the truth more quickly and deliver the meaningful change that these victims deserve.
Well, we're going to leave Prime Minister's questions there. If there's anything else that's newsworthy, we will bring it to you during the rest of this programme. That was Angela Rayner, of course, the Deputy Prime Minister, standing in for Sir Keir Starmer, who is in Canada at the G7, and then Chris Philp, who is the Shadow Home Secretary, filling the role of Kemi Badenoch. I'm joined in this part of the programme by Steve Reid, the Environment Secretary, Richard Fuller, who is the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and Joe Pike, our political correspondent. So, first of all, Chris Philp, as the Shadow Home Secretary, I suppose not a huge surprise that he decided to quiz Angela Rayner about really that report from Baroness Louise Casey earlier in the week about grooming gangs. What did you make of his approach?
Well, I suppose by jumping on that issue again after the response of Kemi Badenoch in the Commons on Monday, yesterday she chaired this news conference with survivors and the families of survivors. We've now got day 3 of the Conservatives focusing on something that they clearly see as a weakness for the Labour Party. A different tone from Chris Philp, at least at the start, compared to the sort of more aggressive approach of Kemi Badenoch on Monday, although that tone didn't last. But really interesting that the Tories are continuing, Vicky, to zero in on this issue of the language Keir Starmer and some of the Labour politicians were using in January, questioning really the motives of people calling for a national inquiry. They clearly see this as a sort of awkwardness, especially when there's been a U-turn on that sort of key central issue. And also, he managed to pivot to a different issue where the Conservatives clearly see a weakness, and which, as the Prime Minister and Number 10 have said, on small boats, the situation in the Channel's deteriorating.
Well, a lot of that focus, as you say, was on these words from Sir Keir Starmer back in January. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
What I won't tolerate is politicians jumping on the bandwagon simply to get attention when those politicians sat in government for 14 long years, tweeting, talking, but not doing anything about it. Now so desperate for attention that they're amplifying what the far right is saying.
So, Steve, do you think that the Prime Minister should apologise for saying that? Those words, do they feel a bit awkward now?
I don't think they do. I mean, the Prime Minister has been, it was clear there, I thought, too. He was talking about politicians who had done nothing in government for 14 years to tackle this problem and then jumped on it in opposition. And I think that does call into question their credibility on what they were doing. Now, just having watched PMQs, Prime Minister's questions just then, I think it was very good that the tone was much more moderated, because this is far too important an issue to dial up the tone and play party politics around it. There is nothing that can be more important to any of us in our society than the protection of children. So I think where we've got to is a very good place. We had some victims of these horrific crimes saying they wanted local inquiries, some saying they wanted national inquiries. Louise Casey was asked to produce a report. She's got immense credibility in this area, having commissioned and written the report into Rotherham over a decade ago, making actually many recommendations that were never implemented and should have done. But her conclusion was that we need that national inquiry so that we have the power to compel witnesses to come forwards and give their evidence to expose what went wrong, so we can take steps and make sure it never happens again.
But just going back to Sir Keir Starmer's words there, we had Rachel Maskell, one of your MPs, on the programme yesterday, and she said that she thought that Sir Keir Starmer's comments were wrong. And there are some people who think that he, by saying that this was a far-right bandwagon, himself overlooked the importance of this.
Well, I'm very sorry to disagree with Rachel. I respect her, much of the work that she leads. But it was clear to me watching that the Prime Minister was talking about politicians who could have done. Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition, was the Minister for Children and didn't do this. Chris Philp, who we just saw at the dispatch box, was at the heart of the Home Office, didn't do anything. And yet when they're in opposition, they call for something. Now, it does seem strange not to do it in government. I think the key point, though, isn't who said what and when. It's the fact that we are having this inquiry. It will be a national inquiry. It will have the power to compel witnesses to come forward so we can expose what went on, root and branch, understand what the real drivers were behind this. We don't just want this to be about words. The government's already got the National Crime Agency conducting a national operation now to go after these gangs, to arrest the people responsible, prosecute them and get them behind bars. We need to do those two things together. This should never, ever have happened in the way that it did. And I think it was right, actually, that the Home Secretary yesterday issued an apology on behalf of the British state over many years for the way that these primarily young girls have been let down.
So, Richard, Kemi Badenoch, when she was in power, the accusation there is that she didn't do enough and she only really came to this issue when she's been in opposition.
So, I mean, first of all, the most important thing is that the families and the people who are at the centre should be the focus of attention. And that's why I think it's right for the Conservative Party and Kemi Badenoch to talk about this for the last 3 days, as you were saying, because one of the points here is that these voices were not heard. They were ignored for so long. So I don't think there's anything wrong with continuing to talk about it. And I'd have to say, I have a different view to Steve on the Prime Minister's words. I think the Prime Minister was wrong in using those words about the grooming gangs. And the reason, I think, is that the grooming gang scandal and the ethnic compartment of that sits atop as the most extreme and horrendous end of a political culture, political acceptance, political consensus that said it's okay to judge different people in our communities based on the values of those communities. And so you could treat people slightly different ways because of a Pakistani origin, or they may be of Indian origin, or they may be of European origin. And I think politicians need to start thinking about what the overall consensus of the British values are. And I think when the Prime Minister says that when you get at it because of trying to point certain communities and talks about it being the far right, he's missing a point. That underlying this, all politicians of all persuasions need to accept that there has to be a standard British norm that we have expectations of in our culture, in our legal system and in our politics.
Do you think that's right?
Oh, I think that is right.
There was squeamishness? Were people covering this up?
We know that from the Rotherham review that Louise Casey did over a decade ago. Keir Starmer, actually, when he was, he's Prime Minister now, but he was Director of Public Prosecutions then, and he led the first prosecution of a criminal gang for exactly.
But do you think some Labour politicians were worried about community relations, and that's why they didn't talk about the fact that some of these gangs were of Pakistani heritage?
That is what was going on. It wasn't restricted to the Labour Party. No. It went wider than that. There were many people in public service who should have prioritised the safety of those children, not a misguided
But it is just astonishing that didn't happen. It's astonishing. It wasn't just isolated cases. We're talking about thousands
in town after town
of children.
Absolutely. But we had that review, remember, from Louise Casey a decade ago. And it laid out actions that should have been implemented but were not over a decade.
So that is the problem. There was a review. You, as the Conservative government, set up a review by Professor Alexis Jay. It took 7 years to complete. It was broad. It was looking at lots of institutions. But then you didn't implement the recommendations. Look at this headline here in The Independent. Child Sex Abuse Inquiry Chair slams the government's disappointing response to recommendations. That's from 2023.
Yeah, and look, I think this is, we are sort of, even though we may disagree on what the Prime Minister said, the fundamental point here is that this experience, this horrendous series of things, which you rightly said was widespread in different areas, goes to a core part of how politics has been acting in this country for a long period of time, which is that there was a willingness or a blind eye pass to where different communities were running by different rules. And in the most horrendous extent, that got into the grooming gangs and other things, and the people who should have been able to say, this is completely wrong, somehow thought that there was some cultural difference, some cultural acceptance, said, I can't go there, or I don't want to go there. Yeah. And why the Prime Minister, I don't want to criticise him too much, but why I got that comment, but he doesn't get it. He thinks that's far right. No, it's not. This has to become the new way.
But you're also accepting that under your government, not enough was done.
I think any politician who has been in office for the last 10, 15 years going through it, they'll have done their bit along the way, and I don't want to criticise people in those particular circumstances, but you reach a point where you get this sort of breakthrough moment, and we perhaps are at that now, and now's the time to capture that, and as Steve says, do it on across parties to do it. And as Kemi Badenoch has said day after day, putting families at the centre of that.
But not just the perpetrators, but many of the victims themselves were criminalised. We had some children who had been raped that were then prosecuted for their part in their own abuse. Absolutely shocking that could have gone on.
Now, the other issue that Chris Philp decided to raise at Prime Minister's Questions was small boats. French police are struggling to halt a potentially record-breaking surge of people from reaching the UK in small boats, organised by a growing network of smuggling gangs. Downing Street said on Tuesday that the situation was deteriorating. And Joe, the French authorities are, we think, planning a change in the law to intercept some of these boats?
A change to maritime regulations, we think, because at the moment they do not intercept boats in the water. That's sort of one challenge, and we think that is going to change, and there'll be specially trained officers who can intercept boats up to 300 metres away from the shore. That's something we're expecting to be formally unveiled when Emmanuel Macron comes to the UK in about 3 weeks' time as part of a state visit. The second problem, it's a problem we've seen on our TV screens a lot in recent weeks, is that the French police on the beaches don't intervene when people are in the water. So you see these pictures of
We've got some. We've actually got
wading,
some pictures.
Right?
Yeah, so here is our Paris correspondent, Andrew Harding, who was reporting from the south of Calais.
So here we are, the migrants standing in the water where the police here cannot go. They say they're not allowed to enter the water. And there's a boat, a taxi boat, that's come along the coast and is now trying to pick up more of them. So the group of migrants here waiting to see if they can also get on board the boat here, and further out to sea, another group of migrants who are also trying to clamber on board. And behind me on the coast, on the shore, maybe 20 policemen standing there watching, not intervening because they say the rules that they have prevent them from going into the water, except if they're going to rescue somebody who's drowning.
So that's the report there from our colleague Andrew Hardy. I mean, there's not much evidence there of gangs being smashed, is there?
Well,
they're adapting their technique, aren't they?
Those pictures there, those images show us that there are problems with the system if the French police can't go in to the shallow water.
But we're paying them millions of pounds, aren't we, the French police?
Getting onto those boats. But within a few weeks, we have a British-French summit here in London, and immigration will be right at the top of the agenda. We have a much better relationship now with the French than we did under the previous government. That's important because we need collaboration to resolve what is happening in the English Channel, but we also need wider collaboration to deal with the gangs who are the root cause of those individuals ending up at the beach in Calais and all getting into these very identical looking boats to cross the channel. You have to smash the whole system. We've brought in new counter-terrorism powers already to start doing that. We've already removed, I think 30,000 people have been removed from the country, people who had no right to be here. That's a 12% increase, and in the first 3 months of the year, 6,000 fewer people are in hotels. So there's progress. I recognise it's nowhere near enough.
But it looks like the smugglers they're adapting their techniques, aren't they? So they are the taxi boats, they call this. They launch from different places, they're evading the French police, and then they're literally picking
One of the
people up.
interesting reasons why they're doing that is because the work to break the supply chains means that they can't get the boats that they would use once and then throw away.
And do you think there's been progress there in terms of that?
It shows you that there is starting to be. It's nothing like enough. I'm not going to pretend it's enough when we've still got so many people coming across. But the fact that we are seeing the impact of some disruption shows it's starting to work. The fact that we are removing more people from the country who have no right to be here shows it's starting to work. And the fact that we're going to have a large swathe of the entire French government here in London in a few weeks' time to sit down with the British cabinet and talk about immigration and how we tackle it shows the strength of relationships that we need to resolve this issue of...
You say there's a better relationship, but numbers are up by a lot, 45%.
But they're going to be here, and we're going to be able to sit down and talk about what further changes...
It's not working, though, is it? You've had it a year.
I heard Joe just a moment ago speculating about one of the changes that may come out of those conversations. If you can't speak, you can't change things. The fact that we can engage with them is going to mean that we can start to resolve some of these problems. But I pointed as well to some of the areas where we have seen progress, such as the 12% increase in the removal of people who have no right to be here.
So, Richard, why didn't you remove more people? You know, the Labour have been in power for a year, and they say they've managed to increase the numbers of removals.
So
you talked tough on this, but actually you didn't deliver it.
Well, there are removals and there are people coming in, and I think on removals that there have been issues about the process for removals. Just saying yes more quickly to people isn't a way of clearing it. It's just saying yes to people more quickly, and I think there may be some of that going on in the way in which numbers are being processed at the moment, some shortcutting in that processing. There's no evidence that there have been greater application of different technology to do it, or different insights, or different rules about it. But on the crossings, the other point you were talking with Steve about, you know, Labour's strategy of like smashing it has sort of three major problems. Number one, the numbers of crossings are up, not down. Number two, as your video showed and your questions indicated, the people running these taxi boats, doing these crossings, are entrepreneurs. They're in it to make a buck. They want to make some money. And, you know, it's a pretty long coastline. People have all got phones. You know, it's going to be very easy, whatever the French do. And I'm pleased the French have changed their law. But the third problem is Labour got rid of the one thing, which was a clear deterrent, never got fully enacted, which was offshore processing, in our case in Rwanda, stopping people ever having the chance to come into this country through these routes. That they'd be taken
we
to
never
a third
found out if it would be a deterrent, did we? Because it never got started.
No, that's fair. There was some sort of anecdotal evidence that people in Ireland were saying blah, 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 but I don't take too much credit. But it is a deterrent. If you know that you get to the country, then we are going, once you get found, you've got to apply, you're going to go somewhere else.
Steve?
You don't have a chance to do it.
It was a gimmick designed to try and get the Conservatives through an election, which ultimately they lost anyway. They spent around £700 million of British taxpayers' money to remove 4 people who were all volunteers, and it made no impact in the long term.
Do you think that there are reports, so lots of journalists have been to Calais and spoken to those who are trying to get across the Channel, and one of the things they do talk about a lot is the fact that they feel they can come to Britain and work. They can work.
Well,
they don't need to show ID, they can work in the black economy, and that's the big draw.
The fact that we are removing more people than ever before, 30,000, that's a 12% increase on a year ago, should make those people think twice, because whereas before they could come here and have a higher chance
but we've just seen them all piling into those boats. It's not stopping them.
There is now a higher chance they will be apprehended and sent back if they have no right.
I think the odds are still quite good that they would get to stay, though, aren't they? Even on those figures.
We're increasing the number of people that are being removed from the country. We're giving new counter-terrorism powers to border security and the police to crack down on the individuals that are coming across, but also the gang masters that are ferrying them across the sea as well. We need to do more, and we can sit down with the French in a few weeks' time and talk about what further changes there need to be to ensure that people are stopped and apprehended before they even get into the water.
OK, let's have a look now at this BBC headline. HS2 to be delayed again with no new date given. So it's going beyond the target date of 2033. So then we don't think today we're even going to know when that high-speed railway line will begin operating. But Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, is expected to tell Parliament that there is no reasonable way to deliver the line on schedule and within budget. I mean, this has been a long-running saga, hasn't it?
It's supposed to open next year.
It's incredible because when it was announced, we were like, oh, 2026.
2026.
That's a long time away.
And it cost 33 billion. We're now looking at over 100 billion. So it's obviously ballooned. And I think this is Heidi Alexander trying to make it...
She's actually making the statement right now. We can just see
lower
it has
expectations, really.
Yeah.
Try and pause it as much as possible and publish these 2 reviews, which seem pretty damning about the contracts and the management, including plans for Euston Station that were very detailed and expensive, and then were scrapped.
So, I mean, you know, this is an utter failure, isn't it?
It's a terrible project.
Why has it
Awful
gone so
project.
wrong?
Well, there's been lots of effort, and it's a very interesting question. There are lots of levels to this, and lots of, but first of all, just from my own, I wish Heidi Alexander all the best because we want that project to be delivered. We want it to end up in a way that delivers what it was originally supposed to do. But going back all the way to 2011. The original prospectus for this railway was delivered in the high-speed rail, did not sound sensible between Birmingham and London because it was a few minutes saved off your journey. It was a more capacity line that was needed, so it was sold on the wrong premise. Then it seems that there were, and I think it was in a public accounts committee, there were 2 sets of figures being presented within HS2, one and the actual figures, another set for public. There's some evidence that Ms Alexander has talked about, that perhaps there's fraud that was going on within HS2. So there are lots, and then political decision-making. So under Mark Harper, they started the efforts to try and get to grips. There's been these 2 reviews, I haven't seen them yet. So I think at all levels, this project has been a major problem. And I'll just say one other thing. There's a very good piece of work, I don't know if I can name the consulting firm, but by a consulting firm that looks at about 2,400 construction projects around the world, including in the UK. And it does pinpoint that in the UK, railway projects are a particularly difficult problem for us in terms of getting them delivered on time and getting them on cost. And I would hope that Ms Alexander will broaden her research, really to take advantage of that, what that consulting firm has found out.
I mean, one estimate is it could now cost over £100 billion. I mean, how do we talked earlier about learning lessons from things. I mean, how do we make sure that this just isn't repeated? This notion of, which lots of people I think is that we just can't build stuff on budget and on time.
It is an example of the most appalling mismanagement, poor contract management, poor financial controls. We had the £100 million bat tunnel as well, if you remember, all of that money wasted on a tunnel that never had needed to be built for bats. So what the government is doing and what Heidi Alexander is saying right now in the chamber, we can see her on the big screen in front here, is looking at the lessons that have been learned from that and how we can take a project that ran entirely out of control, get a grip on it and set out what a realistic and affordable plan will be for this into the future. We need to know that for this particular project, but there are lessons to learn from the absolute catalogue of failure around this that need to be applied for other public procurements and other major projects.
Richard, do you want to come out there?
So just because Steve mentioned it, 100 million on a bat tunnel. When someone hears that, like, what the? I mean, why at that point did not just no, stop. And the reason...
Will you be able to stop that kind of...
The interesting is the political cover.
On that one.
But the political... But the interesting thing, Steve, is there's from both parties, everyone wanted this railway. I mean, where's the mayor of Birmingham, the mayor of Manchester, mayor of Liverpool, the Conservative government, the opposite, everyone, there's so much political cover for this. It was almost like the project that couldn't be touched.
But I don't think the project was misconceived. It was mismanaged. What happened. The costs ran out of control because the previous government didn't grip them. We can't let that happen again. On the Bat Tunnel, actually, we are streamlining the environmental regulations so that projects can go ahead much faster and at much lower cost. We could have spent that money protecting far more of our wildlife.
That's a good thing.
So bat tunnels are going.
Sorry?
No more bat tunnels.
Well, they should have routed the track somewhere else, so it was never necessary to build it.
I've got one very quick question. Farmers are calling for UK animal welfare rules to be upheld in Gulf states deal. This is a trade deal with Gulf states that farmers are very worried could mean low welfare meat being imported. This is your area, so I just wanted to ask you about it.
Well, I agree with what they're saying. You know, we've signed a deal with the EU, with the US, and with India, where we have maintained UK standards. I thought it was wrong when the previous government undercut the standards that we expect British farmers to uphold. If you then undercut that in trade deals, you're really just exporting the problem.
But can you guarantee to farmers that there won't be... They're particularly worried, I think, about chicken, about the import of chicken, about the lower welfare standards.
Well, the deal hasn't been done yet, but we've been very clear we will uphold UK
But
standards.
you can guarantee that even with this,
It's in the
Gulf
manifesto,
states.
and you can look at the other three trade deals we've done. It's always been upheld.
There we go. We have a guarantee not just on bat tunnels, but on welfare standards with imports as well. Thank you very much indeed. That's all for today. Thank you to all my guests. I will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. Please join me then, and thank you for watching.